Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we are going to implement the loading indicator functionality for our course landing page. So if you remember, when we refresh the application, we see that there is here a slight delay between the moment that the data gets requested and the moment that the data is available in the store. During that brief moment, we want to show to the user a loading indicator, but we want to show it only if the backend request is necessary. Maybe the data is already in the store, and in that case, we don't want the loading indicator to show up here for just a brief moment. In order to implement this, we might be tempted to add here a loading flag at the level of the course component. The problem is that the component does not know when the data gets requested, so that's the moment when the load indicator should be displayed, and the component doesn't know as well when the data just came back from the backend. This means that the component is not the best place to store the loading flag that, if set to true, means that the loading indicator should be shown or not. The right place to store that state is in the store. Let's then see here how can we store that. We are going to switch over here to our lessons reducer file and see where are we going to add this lessons loading flag. Let's start by defining this extra flag here at the level of the lesson state. So the lesson state contains not only the entity state for the lesson entity, but it's also going to contain here an extra flag that we are going to call loading, that we are going to define as a boolean. Now we also need to define the initial value of this flag here via this options object. Let's go ahead and fill in here the value of the flag. Let's say that initially the flag is set to false. Now the question is, when should this flag be set to true? This flag should be set to true whenever the data source decides to emit here a lessons page requested action. But there is no need to dispatch here a second action in order to turn the flag to true. We are going to instead turn the loading flag to true in a reducer linked to this action. So we are going to switch over here to the lessons reducer, and here in the reducer function we are going to add here another case clause. We are going to detect here the lessons page requested action, and here in this case we are going to set the loading flag to true. As usual, we are going to do that by first creating a copy of the existing state, and this is done either via the adapter or manually, like it's the case here. And we're going to add here the new set of properties that we want to fill in. In this case, we want to overwrite the value of the loading property. We want to set it to true instead. And we want to return this new object as being the new state outputted here in our reducer. So now the loading flag here in the lesson state is now set to true. The question is, when should we set it back to false? And the answer is right after dispatching here the lessons page loaded event. So here the request to the backend is completed and we can safely turn the flag back to false again. Again, there is no need to dispatch a separate action just to change the value of the flag. Instead, we want to do that here in our reducer, here in the case clause for the lessons page loaded action. We can set the loading flag back to false in a similar way to what we did here. So instead of passing here the state directly to the adapter, we are going to first create a copy of the state, and then we are going to fill in the loading flag with the value false. At this stage, the loading flag in the store is correctly populated at all times. It's set to true while the data is getting loaded, and it's set back to false when the data arrives at the store. So now we just need to switch back here to the course component and use the loading flag that we have in the store in order to show or hide a loading indicator. And in order to do that, we are going to define here a new observable that we're going to call loading, and we are going to define this as being an observable of Boolean. We're going to define this observable by querying the store with a selector. Right now, let's see first how the loading observable is going to be used in the component template, and we can see that it's actually already being used here. So in this ng-if directive, we are subscribing here to the loading observable with the async pipe, And if the emitted value of the loading flag is set to true, then we are showing here this spinner container with the material spinner. If the loading flag is set to false, then we are going to hide the spinner from the user. So now that we know how the loading observable is going to be used by the template, let's go ahead and define it using a new store selector that we are about to write.